What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
As leaders, one of the great challenges we run into is building a culture where the culture is more focused on results than effort. And I will tell you, today our guest is somebody who I think, from my research, is an expert in that space. Stephen Gaffney is a focus in the area of change management, which, if you're in leadership, it's all about change. About honest communication, which is an area that I spend a lot of time talking to people about as far as bringing clarity and having honest communication, specifically so you can ramp things up and have high-performing teams. He's got a client list that goes through a plethora of Fortune 500 companies, as well as organizations that are just attempting to scale. His latest book came out in 2023, and I love the title. It's Unconditional Power. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Yeah, I couldn't really wait for today because of this topic that you have that centers around the part about looking at not just focusing on effort, but on results. That's my language. That's not yours. You have a different way of being able to capture that. Tell our audience a little bit about that.
Well, talking about teams, I don't believe in the terminology high-performing teams in that, I believe it's okay to use, but it doesn't really capture what's up for people today. It's really not about performance, it's about achievement. And I draw the differences. Performance can be confused with hard work versus achievement is about producing results. And the challenge that most entrepreneurs, leaders, executives face is they'll push on people and people go, well, what do you want me to do? I'm working hard. And of course, our response is, it's not about how hard you work. I'm not questioning your work ethic. It's about achievement. And if it's not working, we need to do a different way. Or even if it is working, you can make an argument, we have to continue to improve, because if we're not progressing, we are regressing. There is no such thing as status quo. The other thing is around talking about doing it consistently, because we can burn people up, or burn people out. So it's about consistently high achieving teams. And I think that's what it's all about. And really, I think that's the key to success in life, is having a great team, great relationships. And that's about consistently high achieving teams.
Yeah, man, we got to set on that word consistency, don't we? Because in today's time, it's not being, wait, did you show up? That's the first battleground, right? Did you show up? But in today's chaotic times, consistency is what's going to drive you through these waves we're dealing with, won't it?
Absolutely, because there's some leaders that burn people out. And what they do is, okay, we got to push, which is fine. But if they don't do it consistently, then the performance or the achievement of an organization goes kind of up and down, up and down, up and down. It's about doing this consistently. And if you think about it, that's about life. Life is a marathon. It's not a sprint, as they say. And how are we approaching life as a whole in a consistent manner in which we're successful and we're happy? And I like to use those terms, successful and happy, because success, I determine, is achievement. And then we got to do it in a happy way. We can be successful and unhappy. And we can also be happy and potentially unsuccessful, right? So it's about being successful and happy. I think that's the name of the game.
Yeah. And what do you think in today's climate, Stephen, that people are looking for in their leaders?
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up, because we just kind of completed a national study. It's our first ever national study.
Cool.
And so I'm really excited about that. And what we found out was 83% of people say that a leader should be evaluated based on their ability to lead the team. That's interesting, because most leadership is talked about just leadership as a whole. But 83% of people, when we asked, actually said about people's ability to lead a team. And people can lead people as a whole, but are they leading a team? And that's really critical because that involves some intimacy in how we respond, breaking down silos, working a lot with organizations in a way that isn't just, broadcasting a vision and trying to be inspiring and many other skills that are important, but it's our ability to lead a team, which we can talk about.
Yeah, help me understand that, because that sounds like it's a great concept. But
Yeah.
what was the message they were trying to get you to look at based upon the feedback? Yeah, what did they mean by lead a team? Why is that? That sounds sophomoric.
And that's what it is. No, well, there's many things that we found out in the leadership study, but and when people are leading through teams, but here's what I found out by working with the military and by working in the hospitality industry and all different organizations. The most important trait of great leaders is to create emotional safety. And I'm talking about emotional safety versus psychological safety, because emotional safety is creating that environment so people feel safe to bring things up. Psychological safety, which is what most have talked about, I'm not really a big fan of, again, with that terminology, because people can think it's okay to speak up, but they need to feel safe to bring it up. And here's why this is so important. If we create an environment where people feel safe to bring things up in our teams and as a whole within our organization, then we don't have to get all the right decisions. For example, if I'm lousy at creating an inspiring vision, but I create that emotional safety, people are going to tell me. If I'm lousy at doing operations, or I'm lousy at finance, or I'm lousy in a particular area as a leader, but I create that emotional safety, people are going to give me that feedback. So I don't have to always get all the right decisions, because people are going to tell me, and then I can alter and modulate my way of being based on the feedback. But if I create fear, if I create an organization in which people do not feel safe to give me honest feedback, then I have to get every decision right, because nobody's going to tell me when I'm wrong.
Mm.
That's the problem.
Yeah, I
As
love
well
this.
as the opportunity.
Yeah, because I'm glad you got to this word feedback, because that's what I'm hearing you say, is that kind of create safety is a place where I can both give honest feedback, but here's the other part you mentioned that flipped my trigger. I can receive honest feedback.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah. And
Well,
what's
I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
would say, what's the difficulty the leader has in? I mean, what does it take to create that what you're talking about is a safe environment where honest communication is taking place, honest feedback is given? What barriers do we need to tear down?
Well, first of all, watching our reaction and the reactions of others. So if we've all met people who say, I love honest feedback. You can tell me anything. And then you give them honest feedback and they flip out. Next time they ask us for honest feedback, we're like, I'm not going there. And I've seen leaders get really upset. They're okay with certain kind of feedback, but if somebody disagrees with them, they do not react well. Now, my clients who I work with, they react really well. That's a big reason why they hire us, because we're very connected by the way, the mission, and what we're up to. But it is interesting how some people tout they like honest feedback, but they don't act that way. For example, I'll often tease people. I say, have you ever been to a town hall meeting and a leader goes, any questions? I want to hear any questions. And you're like, oh, don't go there. And then even at home, when you think about it, right? There are people in our lives who actually have trained and conditioned us to lie to them because of their reaction. So we have to watch how we react. But here's something else to consider. How about today's leader managing distractions? I've watched meetings, Mike, where people are under the table texting, or they're on their laptop answering stuff, and people are doing other things in the middle of a meeting. I was watching a meeting, paid to kind of observe the team and then do a presentation. And the guy who was in charge of business development, he had two phones out and was texting. This is why the head of the organization was talking. He's doing this. And I said to the head of the organization, you got to manage that distraction. He goes, well, the person's really good at their job, and I don't want to disturb them. He was afraid to have that confronting conversation. Well, the problem was that people didn't respect that leader because he wasn't taking care of that person with the business development who's doing other things. So we can create an unsafe environment by not making people feel safe to bring things up because of not managing distractions. So as leaders, are we setting the message that, put your phones away, put the electronic devices away, be focused in the meeting? Or if we have to use electronic devices, make sure that that's part of the meeting and what we're showing, or somebody taking notes or whatever. So I'm not trying to be silly about today's work world, but it is really important. Are we reacting in a safe manner? And are we getting others to? And are we managing distractions? Or how about this? as a leader, we're open, but you got somebody who gets defensive, who's self-righteous, who
Mhm.
sits there with their arms folded, reacts negatively, they're going to shut down communication as well. So creating that emotionally safe environment, critical to today's success.
Totally. And what you're saying with this is that I think the hesitation leaders have, or people, let's just broaden this out, is in providing what you're calling honest feedback, we're worried that it's going to come across as criticism.
Yes.
Okay. And what you described is if that leader had provided feedback to that salesperson on how they're being perceived by others, how
Yes.
what they're doing is actually disruptive and interferes with their brand, interferes with how they're positioned, that's feedback. And what happens is they then get a choice on how they're going to respond to that. Are they going to are they going to react? Are they going to respond effectively? And that's the definition that I write about of the definition of high EQ is do I react or do I respond effectively? And so in this particular case, without feedback, our teams are robbed of the opportunity to be able to see what are steps that they need to be able to take to improve performance. And it's honest feedback. It's not criticism.
Well, and people are boss watching. In other words, if the leader is not actually able to give honest feedback, everybody else is like, I'm not going to go there.
Hmm.
And so that also it brings up things as a leader. Are we vulnerable? Are we willing to share that we've made mistakes? Do we share with people, or are we acting like we got it all figured out? Because that's also going to shut down communication. What I always say to people, because most of the work I do is around with leadership teams, and I'll say to them, you don't realize how intimidating you are. And people go, I don't know. And I say, yeah, I'm saying not because of your personality necessarily, it could be intimidating, but really your position. By the mere fact of you walking in a room, people are automatically going to start to be shut down because some get intimidated. Now, not everybody is that way, but so you have to counteract that and show that you're so humility and show that we're all in this together and we're all trying to figure this out. And I share mistakes. I've made many, many mistakes. Like, I'll give you an example. I was doing an interview with MSNBC, and I do a lot of TV interviews. And I got back to the office and I said to my assistant, how did I do? And Mike, I thought I did great. She looked at me and she said, do you really want to know the truth? Which is always an interesting line.
Yeah, it makes you want to head to the door.
And she told me how I basically did a horrible job. I repeated myself. I was off on a tangent. In my head, I thought I was doing a great job, but overall, I wasn't. And I was embarrassed and humiliated. But it made me think about how I came across and was I focused on the point I was trying to make. And then the next time I did an interview, I was light years ahead. The point is, we learn through honest feedback, but I'll share that story as we're all in this together. And we all make mistakes. And you know what? When people say, well, I don't make mistakes, well, then we're not trying hard enough. I'm
Hmm.
constantly making mistakes, but we try things. Even in business, are you trying to branch out, do different things through different products or services? Are you afraid and trying to keep with the same old thing? Or how about with your expertise about hiring? Are we willing to hire people who will push back on us, who will create that interesting environment? Are we trying to hire clones that is not going to help us? And so, as a whole, it brings up things around feedback. And here's what I would say is a central message. If people forget everything out of what I'm saying, the most important message out of this is the biggest problem is not what people say, it's what they're not saying to each other. It's what they leave out that is the problem. And that's the trick, is to get the unsaid said. Really, as a leader, said in a succinct manner, get the unsaid said.
Yeah, I love this. Get the unsaid said. Because what happens when you do that, you are greasing the wheels on communication, getting people out of not just expressing what they're thinking and not processing whether or not what they're thinking is going to be received well by somebody else. You're helping to increase that dialogue because they may be thinking it's a difficult message that to be presented. Now, you've done some work in that space before a while back. Um, what are one or two things that when you're working with leaders that you try to help them understand about steps that enables them to increase their effectiveness in delivering difficult messages?
Well, first, as a whole, realize that we're the problem first. Great leaders blame themselves first, poor leaders blame others first. And people say, well, that's a heavy word. Okay, do what you want, switch the word. The point is that in life, if we look at ourselves first, that is really helpful in moving. I've worked with some leaders who will blame others first, but the best ones blame themselves first. So if somebody's not getting the message, instead of saying, I've told that person 5 times, say, well, wait a minute. The definition of clarity is not by the sender, it's by the receiver. If people are still confused, maybe I need to explain it a different way. Or maybe if the team isn't working well, how am I leading the team? And so another example of this is some leaders want people to come to them, but great leaders go to others and search out in their own neighborhood. I don't mean in a physical way, but where they're actually mentally at, and help them lead through things. Are we focused on our strengths? Whatever the case may be. But really, I think the key in life is to look at ourselves first. But here's the interesting part is a lot of friends and people will help and often make us try to feel better by blaming others. I'll give you an example. So about a year into me speaking, I was so bad at this one presentation that half the people left. Like they did not wait for me to finish my talk. They just got up and left. I was horrible. And so again, another example is I went back and I felt really embarrassed and all that stuff. And I even tried to give the money back to the client. I mean, but she was great. She said, no, no, no. And you weren't that bad, but I was bad. And so I started to, and I said to my friends and my peers, they said, well, some audiences aren't, really receptive, but don't worry about it. I'm like, no, 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 I'm the problem. I thought to myself. And in life, I've realized by working with great leaders is if you blame yourself first, you can change you. So if I focus on what I was doing, what was I doing that made it so ineffective? Anyway, long story short, I didn't know how to manage group dynamics. I didn't know how to deal with when people didn't understand a point. I know that sounds obvious now, but I really didn't know anything about that. So I started to study group dynamics and how to work with audiences, and that audiences can be different, and how to kind of deal with various things. And then I became very proficient at managing group dynamics to the point where I love debates when I'm doing a session. I love it because people are really trying to take on that point. I don't look at it as an attack. I look at it as they're trying to grow and understand. So I'm saying this because when we look at life, a lot of growth happens when we failed. But the question is, are we learning the right lessons? Are we blaming ourselves or taking responsibility, or do we blame others? The key is take responsibility for our life.
Yeah, I love that. I just read this morning, by the way, Steve. I don't know if you saw this. Of course, Saturday Night Live's 50th anniversary was this past weekend. Big show around this stuff. It's hit the media a lot, and they were interviewing some of the central character actors that were on it for a number of years. I mean, long runners. And there was a comment that was made that they would go and they would practice, and then they would do the dress rehearsal, and it would come out pretty well at the table read. Dress rehearsal would rock, but it just didn't work in live. And Lorne Michaels, who was the executive producer, the founder of Saturday Night Live, made us. He said his statement was always the same. He says the audience is always right. The audience,
I love that.
The audience is always right. Because what happens is when you were talking earlier, what I wrote down to where we get conflict as leaders, and when we're not open, we have a tendency to go and rationalize. When somebody gives us feedback, we rationalize why we did. Now, that rationalization may come across as defensivism. That's another thing that comes into it. But I kept thinking about Lorne Michaels' comment. The audience is always, if I go there first, right, and use that to unpack, if the message isn't being received, if things aren't working, going that self-analysis is that if things aren't working there, well, their perception is always right. I got to go find out what's broken in there, as opposed to fixing blame. Get people pointed to the outcome that we're trying to achieve, and then figure out what steps can be taken.
Reminds me years ago, this other speaker, Randy Pennington, he said, the marketplace doesn't lie. In other words, it's giving you feedback. But I love what you're saying about the audience. The audience is always right because, what was it? The audience is always right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And because it really tells us. And the thing is, are we willing to take the hard messages? And the tough part is, Mike, in my experience, is our friends often will try to make us feel better. And in the moment, it does, right? When you blame others, oh, I'm off the hook. But it really doesn't help us because we can't change other people unless we start changing ourselves. And so I look at life, no matter what am I going to do about it? In 2009, I had a cancer bout. And I'm fully fine now. I'm recovered and everything. But then that was also times during that was Great Recession. So cancer and Great Recession. And, people said to me, a lot of friends, look, it's tough times or whatever, just do the best you can. And I was like, yeah, but I couldn't control that I had cancer, but I could control how I responded to the cancer. I couldn't control that there was a recession, but I could control how I responded to the recession. So I retooled my business. And from that year on, we've had our best years in business. It's not because I'm that smart. It's that I'm willing to look at myself first, because there's got to be answers. And so I think just as a whole, when I've had the privilege of working with some of the best admirals and generals and executives, I've learned a lot from them. Humility, being vulnerable, but constantly when faced with a problem, they look at themselves first.
Okay, let's center on something, because you have a unique window because of the work you've done in specifically in the military at pretty high levels, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's a reason why I want to bring this question up. It has to do with, we think of the leaders of our military, like the Marine Corps, for example. The commandant of the Marine Corps. That's the person who's in charge of every Marine globally. That's the commandant. All right. You would think that would be a warmonger, in your face, driven. George, what was his name? Patton, with his pearl handle shooter shooting at the airplanes coming over. That's what it takes. Effective leaders in the military, right? How do they operate from your perspective and live out what you're describing as vulnerable? And I mean, isn't that an oxymoron?
I know that may sound that way, but I've worked with some of the best leaders. An
That's
example
right.
would
So I
be,
asked the question. I
yeah.
wanted to say, to share your perspective on that.
Well, let's look at, well, first let me answer your question. So Frank Kelly would be a great example. He was in charge of Marine Corps Systems Command. He's the #2 at Defense Acquisition University. He's a fantastic leader. Former, it was general. I guess once a general, always a general.
That's
I
right.
was like,
I was once a Marine. My
you know,
dad died as a Marine, right? And he was always a Marine.
And Frank Kelly is a fantastic leader. So when you look at Frank, and if anybody ever gets a chance, reach out to him. He's a fantastic leader. And the thing about Frank is that he is very decisive, but he's also willing, and he has is learning. He's constantly asking questions and inquiry. He's always growing. We have great conversations. He's learned from me, but I've also learned from him. I mean, everybody loves Frank. And one of the things about it is he's very clear on his communication, but he's also very people oriented. So I think when people hear the word vulnerability, it often mistakenly gets associated with weakness, right?
That's right.
Vulnerability, oh, let me just tell you all things. It could be that for some people, but great vulnerability is where you share that we made mistakes, but then how we've learned from mistakes and how we're growing it together. And when we make a mistake, for all of us, that we admit it and then correct it, right? And so when I look at Frank Kelly, another person I've got a chance to interact with is Deborah James, who was she was the head of the secretary. She was the Secretary of the Air Force under Obama, President Obama, and she was the second woman to ever hold the office. She's another fantastic leader. And so she talks about Plan B. How we all have Plan A, but do you have a Plan B? Because sometimes things don't work as planned, but in the end, Plan B can actually be better than ever. And she talks about how she became who she is today because of Plan B, where she was trying to achieve something and it ended up kind of working around with Plan B. And then she became the Secretary of the Air Force. Fantastic leader. Admiral Thompson, who was the head of the Defense Logistics Agency, has been another client of mine, and he took over that in 2009. He's now, I think, retired, but he was another fantastic leader. And he, again, great humility, but also very decisive, very people oriented. And he talked about making DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, one DLA. And he said, words matter. So us versus them. No, it's us. And then I would add, them is the enemy. And he was talking about, using language in one DLA. So I've had the opportunity and privilege to work with some of the best leaders ever, and they're in the military, and all of them listen and probe and get feedback from others and create an environment. All of them, all the ones I mentioned, are just experts at creating people to feel safe, to bring up the truth, their truth, so they can make the best decisions possible.
Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.